Senate, and live joint select committee meetings and even media briefings. Don't forget to click the subscribe button to receive a notification when we are streaming live events. So visit our YouTube channel ParlView to keep current with all our parliamentary happenings.
The Honorable, the Speaker.
Almighty God, we give thanks to you, the creator of the universe, and humbly beseech you to direct and prosper the deliberations of the members of this house here assembled for the advancement of your glory and the trust and welfare of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Grant that peace and happiness, truth and justice may be established among us for all generations. Amen. Amen. Namaste.
Oath or affirmation, announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, Honorable Kamla Prasad-Bissessar, MP, member for Siparia, has asked to be excused from today's sitting of the House. And Ms. Ramona Ramdial, MP, member for Couva North, has asked to be excused from sittings of the House during the period December 1st to December 31st, 2017. The leave which the members seek is granted. Honorable members, pursuant to Standing Order 89-2, The following members were appointed to serve on the sessional select committees of the House of Representatives for the third session, 11 Parliament. Standing Orders Committee. Mrs. Bridget Mary Anizet George, Chairman. Mr. Faris Alwari, Member. Mr. Anthony Garcia, Member. Mrs. Glenda Jennings-Smith, Member. Dr. Fuad Khan, Member. Mrs. Vidya Gayadeen Gopi Singh, Member. House Committee. Mrs. Camille Robinson Regis, Chairman. Mr. Colum Ember, Member. Major General Retired Edmund Dillon, Member. Mrs. Ayana Webster Roy, Member. Dr. Rudal Munilal, Member. Mr. David Lee, Member. Committee of Privileges. Mrs. Bridget Mary Anizet George, Chairman. Mrs. Camille Robinson Regis, Member. Mr. Fitzgerald Hind, Member. Mr. Stuart Young, Member. Dr. Suruj Ratan Rambachan, Member. Dr. Rudal Munilal, Member. Statutory Instruments Committee. Mrs. Bridget Mary Anizet George, Chairman. Ms. Nicole Oliver, Member. Mr. Stuart Young, Member. Dr. Lovell Francis, Member. Mr. Rujnath Indar Singh, Member. Mr. Rushton Parry, Member. Business Committee. Mrs. Bridget Mary Anizet George, Chairman. Mr. Colum Ember, Member. Mrs. Camille Robinson Regis, Member. Mrs. Sharian Critchlow Coburn, Member. Mr. Barry Padarath, Member. Mr. David Lee, Member. Honorable members, I also now have correspondence from the Presidents of the Senate dated November 30th, 2017. Dear Honorable Speaker, change of membership to joint select committees. I wish to inform you that at a sitting held on Tuesday, November 28th, 2017, the Senate agreed to the following resolution. Be it resolved that the Senate agreed to the following appointments to the joint select committees. Mr. Ronald Huggins, in lieu of Ms. Alison Bashk, on the Joint Select Committee on State Enterprises and the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee. Mr. Robert Lee Hunt, in lieu of Mr. Michael Coppin, on the Joint Select Committee on National Security. Dr. Lester Henry, in lieu of Mr. Michael Coppin, on the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Ms. Alison West, in lieu of Ms. Ayana Lewis, on the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration. Mr. Saddam Hussain, in lieu of Mr. Wayne Sturge, on the Joint Select Committee on National Security. Ms. Anita Haynes, in lieu of Mr. Roger Samuel, on the Joint Select Committee on Foreign Affairs. Mr. Saddam Hussain, in lieu of Mr. Roger Samuel, on the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Diversity, and Equality. Mr. Taka Obika, in lieu of Mr. Wayne Sturge, on the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Ms. Anita Haynes, in lieu of Ms. Khadija Amin, on the Joint Select Committee on Parliamentary Broadcasting. Mr. Tahaka Obika, in lieu of Mr. Roger Samuel, on the Public Accounts Committee. Ms. Melissa Ramkisoon, in lieu of Ms. Jennifer Raful, on the Public Accounts Committee. Ms. Jennifer Raful, in lieu of Dr. Daneshwar Mahabir, on the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee. And Dr. Daneshwar Mahabir, in lieu of Ms. Melissa Ramkisoon, on the Joint Select Committee on Foreign Affairs. Accordingly, I respectfully request that the House of Representatives be informed of this decision at the earliest convenience. Please. Yours respectfully, Christine Kangaloo, President of the Senate.
Bills brought from the Senate, petitions, papers.
Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I have the honor to lay the following papers. The audited financial statements of the National Schools Dietary Services Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2016. The audited financial statements of the National Maintenance Training and Security Company Limited for the year ended December 31st, 2016. the audited financial statements of the Sports Company of Trinidad and Tobago Limited for the financial year ended September 30th, 2016. I beg to move that papers 1 to 3 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee.
Honorable members, the question is that papers 1 to 3 be referred to the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following papers 4 and 5, which are the responses to the 4th report of the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee on an examination of the system of internal audit within the public service. These responses are from the Ministry of Rural Development and Local Government and the Ministry of Works and Transport. Paper 6, the ministerial response of the Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development to the first report of the Joint Select Committee on Social Services and Public Administration on the inquiry into the current level of violence among students in schools with particular focus on physical and cyber bullying. Madam Speaker, thank you very kindly.
Minister of Health.
Madam Speaker, I have the honor to lay the following paper, the Dental Profession Amendment to the Schedule Order 2017. Thank you very much.
Reports from committees, Prime Minister's questions, urgent questions.
The member for Caroni Central.
Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Could the Minister of National Security please indicate who signed the papers for the release of prisoner Vicky Budram and who signed for the receipt of the prisoner at the Tunapuna police station?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm slightly taken aback to see this question this afternoon, as the government has announced repeatedly from yesterday and into this morning, there is an active police investigation that is taking place. It would be extremely premature at this time to announce and improper, and it has the potential to prejudice an investigation taking place. So at this time, what we tell the country is let us await the outcome of the active ongoing police investigation that's being assisted by the prison services of Trinidad and Tobago. And we certainly will not on this side prejudice any such investigation, and we compliment them once again for their work well done.
Member for Caroni Central Supplemental.
The answer to this question, Madam Speaker, simply ask for a fact.
Yeah, member, it's a question you're going to ask?
Yeah. Could
Yes.
the Minister give us the facts?
Madam Speaker, as I just outlined, the government is still awaiting the outcome of an investigation, an active investigation that is taking place, and I'm now beginning to wonder why it is those on the other side want to prejudice an active police investigation.
Member for Caroni Central, you have another supplemental? Member for Naparima.
The member for Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West, as a lawyer, not admit that given those factual information, the question is, I'm asking a question of fact, which will
Member,
not prejudice.
If you're going to ask a question, I'll allow you to ask a question. So please ask the question.
Who were the persons involved in the regarding the question asked by my colleague?
All right, we're not allowed that.
Caroni
I believe that question has been asked and has been answered. Member for Point Appeal.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Minister of Energy and Energy Industries. Based on an article published in the Trinidad Guardian on Thursday, November 30th, 2017, which stated that officials from Trinidad and Tobago government were expected to travel to Venezuela on the aforementioned date to resolve the issues surrounding the Laura and Manatee gas field. Could the Minister state who were those officials?
Minister of Energy and Energy Industries.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Madam Speaker, the officials who traveled to Venezuela are as follows. Mr. Selwyn Lashley, Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, Head of Delegation. Ms. Louise Poywing, Senior State Counsel, Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. And Ms. Yana Sharma, Legal Officer 2, Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs.
Member for Caroni Central.
To the Minister of National Security, could the Minister indicate the status of the investigation relating to the crime involving transfer of $10 million to unauthorized accounts by the Division of Tourism, Culture and Transportation of the Tobago House of Assembly?
Minister of National Security.
Very much, Madam Speaker. Member for Caroni Central, the status is it's an ongoing investigation.
Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, through you to the Honourable Prime Minister, could the Prime Minister confirm that his book From Mason Hall to Whitehall is now the subject of an investigation by the Integrity Commission?
Prime Minister.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Madam Speaker. This question, of course, would be best directed to the Integrity Commission.
Member for Princestown, supplemental.
In light of that answer, Madam Speaker, the question is, could the Honourable Minister indicate who is the distributor or person responsible for the distribution of this book?
I will allow that as a supplemental question. Member for Faizabad.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Faizabad to the Minister of Education, could the Minister indicate which classes, when classes for first year to Standard 3 students of the Superior Union Presbyterian School will resume following the fire on Monday, October the 2nd, 2017?
Minister of Education.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, classes for first year to Standard 3 students at the Superior Union Presbyterian School will resume on Monday, the 8th of January, 2018 at the existing site. Thank you.
Member for Chaguanas West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Chaguanas West, to the Minister of National Security, in light of the recent escape of prisoner Hamilton Small from the police custody at the Arima Magistrates Court on Tuesday, November 28, 2017, can the Minister indicate what measures will be taken to strengthen security of prisoners at the holding cells whilst being taken to and from the magistrates' courts?
Minister of National Security.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, once again, it would be a dereliction of duty and putting certain national security matters at risk for us to spell out the exact particulars of what is being done with respect to the security of prisoners and them being taken from their holding cells to and from the magistrates' court. But what I can assure both you, Madam Speaker, the national public, and those on the other side of, is that the prison service and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service are expected to learn from any mistakes that were made, and they will be doing what is possible and reasonable to strengthen these facilities and the processes to ensure it does not happen again.
Member for Princestown.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Minister of Trade and Industry, in light of an announcement that there will be an increase in flour prices, could the Minister indicate what is the current state of discussions with the national flour mills?
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Madam Speaker, let me say definitively that there has been no announcement of an increase in the price of flour. Rather, there was an article which featured Mr. Kelvin Mahabir, the CEO of National Flour Mills, and in that article he would have cited several challenges, including the price of wheat and the fact that it was, the price was increasing, and it is in responded. Your question here speaks to the communication aspect of it. The National Flour Mills paper Monday at 3:30 p.m. when we will discuss all of the input items into the price of flour.
Member for Princestown. Supplemental.
Madam, through you to the Honourable Minister. Honourable Minister, since the signalling or suggesting a price increase by the CEO through that article, Has the ministry engaged in stakeholder consultation on this matter?
There's no need to engage in any other consultation at this time other than with the national flour mills themselves.
Member for Princess Down.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the Honourable Minister of Social Development and Family Services, could the Minister indicate if the government will be providing temporary food support through temporary food cards as last year to all 41 members of Parliament for impoverished constituents during the Christmas period?
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I am unable to so indicate as the government has not taken a decision on this matter.
Supplemental member for Princess Down.
Madam Speaker, to the Honourable Minister. Honourable Minister, today is the 1st of December. Christmas will be celebrated a few weeks from now. Can you give us a timeline in terms of when we'll be able to get a definitive answer on this particular question?
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Madam Speaker, I am unable to so indicate at this time.
Member for Princess Down.
Madam Speaker, could we ask through you to the Honourable Member if she would give the Honourable Member will give the undertaking to have this answer provided to us before Christmas 2017?
Minister of Social Development and Family Services.
Madam Speaker, once the Cabinet makes a decision on the matter before Christmas 2017, I will so provide the House with an answer.
Questions on notice, questions for oral answer.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we will be answering all questions for oral answer and all questions for written answer.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Oropouche West, question number 27 to the Minister of question number 26 to the Minister of Trade and Industry.
Minister of Trade and Industry.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. In reply to A, over the period July 1st to October 31st, 2017, the Consumer Affairs Division received no formal complaints regarding the issue of retailers rounding off bills to the nearest dollar. However, the division did receive 4 queries from members of the public, as well as 1 inquiry from a print media journalist. In response to B, upon receipt of the inquiries, it was evident that concerns arose from an absence of awareness of the rounding guidelines, elimination of the 1-cent coin issued by the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, and which came into effect on July 1st, 2017. The Consumer Affairs Division verified the information with the Central Bank and sensitized the inquirers, and subsequently made the information available on its Facebook page. In reply to Part C, as part of the transition towards the elimination of the 1-cent coin, the Ministry of Trade and Industry has supported the efforts of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. Though the Consumer Affairs Division has not undertaken a public education campaign specific to this issue, all relevant information has been made available on the Consumer Affairs Division's Facebook page and has been included in the conduct of its public lectures where appropriate. Further, the Consumer Affairs Division is encouraging consumers to make inquiries and report any discrepancy that they may encounter via the division's Facebook page. Additionally, the Consumer Affairs Division takes the opportunity, whenever it arises, to employ moral suasion to remind producers, suppliers, and retailers to be fair in their pricing in this period of transition to ensure that consumers are not disadvantaged. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Supplemental member for Kumunto Mansinilla.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Honourable Minister, in light of the fact that some persons may not have Facebook, can the Honourable Minister indicate whether the opportunity still exists for persons who still have coins in their possession to redeem it at any bank?
Minister of Trade and Industry.
I think that's a matter for the Central Bank, but I can tell you any concerns which consumers have, they can be reached by the Consumer Affairs hotline.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. On behalf of the member for Oropouche West, question number 27 of Housing and Urban Development.
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. In response to Part A of the question, the residents of the Student Towers community have made reports of unlawful activities to the HTC. In response to Part B of the question, the HTC conducted investigations and concluded that there were persons illegally occupying 4 apartment units at the community. Having determined the existence of the illegal occupants, the HTC, with the support of the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, evicted the illegal occupants. Following the eviction exercise, the apartments were secured, pending further investigations into the status of the persons to whom the units were legitimately allocated. On the same day of the eviction exercise, it was brought to the attention of the HTC that the persons who were evicted returned to the units from which they were evicted. The HTC subsequently reported the matter to the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service, who then organized a joint police and army exercise at the towers and evicted and arrested 15 persons. Trinidad and Tobago Police Service continues to monitor the situation at Clifton Towers closely.
Member for Oropouche West.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Question number 28 to the Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Minister of Housing and Urban Development.
Thank you again, Madam Speaker. The Estate Management Division of the HTC has responsibility for the maintenance and upkeep of HTC's apartment buildings.
Requests for leave to move the adjournment of the House on definite matters of urgent public importance, statements by ministers, personal explanations, introduction of bills on the supplemental order paper, the Anti-Gang Bill 2017 in the name of the Attorney General.
Attorney General.
Speaker, in accordance with Standing Order 64-1A, I beg to move that the next stage of the Anti-Gang Bill 2017 be taken next Wednesday, December 6th, 2017.
Honorable members, the question is that the next stage of the Anti-Gang Bill 2017 be taken on Wednesday, December 6, 2017. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it.
Madam Speaker, as discussed with the Chief Whip, there is another bill that we would like to place on the order paper, and it will be coming later in the proceedings. So at that time, we will move.
I guess there's agreement on this.
Yes, I said we discussed it.
Relating to the business or sittings of the House and moved by a minister.
Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, whereas it has become necessary to make appointments to joint select committees, I beg to move that this House agree to the following appointments. Mr. Randall Mitchell in lieu of Mr. Faris Al-Rawi on the Joint Select Committee on National Security. Mr. Esmond Ford in lieu of Mr. Randall Mitchell on the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity. Mrs. Sherianne Critchlow Coburn in lieu of Mr. Randall Mitchell on the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Mr. Terence Dial Singh in lieu of Ms. Marlene McDonald on the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Dr. Lavelle Francis in lieu of Mr. Stuart Young on the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions and Statutory Authorities, including the THA. Mr. Esmond Ford in lieu of Mr. Faris Al-Rawi on the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions and Statutory Authorities, including the THA. Mr. Adrian Leons in lieu of Ms. Marlene McDonald on the Public Accounts Committee. Dr. Nian Gatsby Dolly in lieu of Ms. Shamfa Kajo on the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. And Brigadier General retired Ansel Antwine in lieu of Mr. Maxi Cuffey on the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee. I beg to move.
Honorable members, the question is that the House agree to the following appointments to the Joint Select Committees. Mr. Randall Mitchell in lieu of Mr. Faris Alwari on the Joint Select Committee on National Security. Mr. Esmond Ford in lieu of Mr. Randall Mitchell on the Joint Select Committee on Human Rights, Equality and Diversity. Mrs. Sherianne Critchlow Coburn in lieu of Mr. Randall Mitchell on the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Mr. Terence Dial Singh in lieu of Ms. Marlene McDonald on the Joint Select Committee on Finance and Legal Affairs. Dr. Lovell Francis in lieu of Mr. Stuart Young on the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions, and Statutory Authorities, including the THA. Mr. Esmond Ford in lieu of Mr. Faris Alwari on the Joint Select Committee on Local Authorities, Service Commissions, and Statutory Authorities, including the THA. Mr. Adrian Leons in lieu of Ms. Marlene McDonald on the Public Accounts Committee. Dr. Nyan Gadsby Dolly in lieu of Ms. Shamfa Kojo on the Public Accounts Enterprises Committee. And Brigadier General Retired Ansel Antwine in lieu of Mr. Maxi Coffey on the Public Administration and Appropriations Committee. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? The ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion, that this House appoint the following 6 members to sit with an equal number from the Senate on the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Cybercrime Bill 2017. Mr. Faris Al-Rawi, Major General Retired Edmund Dillon, Mr. Fitzgerald Hines, Ms. Shamfa Kajo, Dr. Rudal Mudilal, and Mr. Barry Padarath.
Honorable members, the question is that this House appoint the following 6 members to sit with an equal number from the Senate on a Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Cybercrime Bill 2017. Mr. Faris Alwari, Major General Retired Edmund Dillon, Mr. Fitzgerald Hines, Ms. Shamfa Kojo, Dr. Rudal Munilal, and Mr. Barry Padarath. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it. Leader of the House.
Thank you very kindly, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the following motion, that this House appoint the following 6 members to sit with an equal number from the Senate on the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill 2016. Mr. Colum Imbert, Mr. Faris Al-Rawi, Mr. Stuart Young, Ms. Nicole Oliver, Mr. Ganga Singh, and Mr. Rudranath Indar Singh. I beg to move.
Honorable members, the question is that this House appoint the following 6 members to sit with an equal number from the Senate on the Joint Select Committee established to consider and report on the Gambling, Gaming and Betting Control Bill 2016. Mr. Colum Imber, Mr. Faris Alwari, Mr. Stuart Young, Ms. Nicole Oliver, Mr. Ganga Singh, and Mr. Rudranath Indar Singh. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any against? I think the ayes have it.
Public business, government business, bills, second reading.
Honorable members, the debate on the second reading of the following bill, which was adjourned on Friday, November 17, 2017, will be resumed. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act, the Customs Act, and the Exchange Control Act. Mr. Member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this very important bill today. Madam Speaker, if you would permit me the opportunity just to put this bill in context and what it means for Trinidad and Tobago as a sovereign state in a shrinking global world. Madam Speaker, one of the biggest issues we face, unfortunately, as a growing nation is that of corruption. And this bill very squarely is to deal with corruption. And this bill, additionally, is for us to fulfill international obligations. Because, Madam Speaker, in today's world, with the transferability of money, assets, etc., and the level of corruption that takes place, there are a number of international organizations, some of which we are signatories and active parties to, that have sat down together and over a period of time tried to devise ways and means to combat the scourge of corruption. Because you see, Madam Speaker, respectfully, the scourge of corruption really affects the most vulnerable in society, first and foremostly. Madam Speaker, 2 years ago, I was provided with the opportunity in preparation for an international anti-corruption summit to sit down in a room in England with a number of participants from the G20 countries and from FATF and from other organizations such as this to plan the then Prime Minister of Britain's anti-corruption summit, David Cameron. And as we sat in that room and we were discussing amongst ourselves some of the matters that could be taken globally to fight corruption and to find money and to fight money laundering, and what money laundering means and who it affects, etc., it dawned on me that we were the only small island and the only small country that was sitting in that room, along with all of these big players. And the genesis of that lay in October 2015 or November 2015, when we, as a new administration, had come into government. And the then Prime Minister went to Malta for a CHOGM conference. And the Prime Minister of Great Britain, David Cameron at the time, sought our Prime Minister, Dr. Rowley, and told him that Britain had been following very closely the events unfolding in Trinidad and Tobago, and in particular, some of the allegations being made with respect to corruption. And Prime Minister Cameron reported to Dr. Rowley that he would like him to participate in his anti-corruption summit. And we were the only sovereign nation, this small and from this part of the world, that participated in that conference. And it was because of what we promised to do as an administration coming in to fight corruption. That was the start and the genesis of our term. I think by now the country has seen what we have been doing with respect to our fight against corruption and what is going on. And I must say at this point, Madam Speaker, I'm very disappointed as I look across on the other side at some of the persons who are missing today. Because this is an important bill that we're debating, as I'm hoping to do this afternoon and speak to the wide-ranging effects and on how it affects us as a nation and how the rest of the globe sees us. I must say that I'm disappointed to see that the member for Caroni East, who made a contribution on this bill on the last occasion, is not here. In particular, the member for Oropouche East. I would have expected him to be here to be taking notes and maybe perhaps to contribute. Madam Speaker, when we came in as an administration, one of the first crises we faced was with respect to this country's international obligations in the fight against money laundering by an international organization called FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. And then there's a Caribbean subset called CFATF. And we had been hearing murmurings before coming into power that Trinidad was at risk of being blacklisted. And what this means, citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, is if we don't fulfill certain international obligations to fight money laundering and to make it easy to track terrorist financing and other of these types of inequitous, illegal activities, as a country, we would be downgraded, and the worst thing that could happen is we would be blacklisted, which would then mean that our local banking and financial institutions would not be able to have corresponding banking with international banks. That has the potential to just grind your economy to a halt. I would like at this stage, on behalf of the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, to personally congratulate and thank the member for San Fernando West, the Honorable Attorney General, for immediately taking on the task of getting Trinidad and Tobago out of this realm of blacklisting and being established as a grey place. It appears that nothing was being done to fulfill our international obligations. Immediately, CFATF and FATF and the Attorney General was put to chair CFATF, it being a rotational chairmanship, they told us that Trinidad and Tobago has not done sufficient actions, has not taken sufficient actions, including legislative actions, to take us out of the realm of being a place where money laundering can take place very easily. And it is important that the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago know that is what we came in and faced at the end of 2015. And how hard we have worked as an administration. Persons will no doubt remember what we did with respect to FATCA and also other areas that we've been working on. We heard recently about the fact that we are in difficulties with Global Forum. Again, under the previous administration, they're the ones who signed us as a country into Global Forum, which is the European countries, and other international obligations. And we weren't fulfilling it. And one wonders why it is that an administration, and in particular under the stewardship of the member for Siparia and her then Attorney General, Anand Ram Logan, would take, and I can only think, an active and conscious decision to put this country on the brink of being blacklisted, to not do anything to fight money laundering, to not do anything to ensure we fulfill our international obligations, to follow the money, to put things in place to make us a more lawful society and to make enforcement an easier thing. So we had that coming at us immediately. Madam Speaker, I am grateful for the hard work, and I'm seeing some of our technocrats who, along with the Attorney General, led the charge in getting this country back to where we want to be. And this is one of the areas we worked hard on as an administration, and we're now being internationally recognized as being a country via this administration that is prepared to take the difficult, but these weren't difficult decisions, to take the decisions to make us compliant and to make sure the fight against corruption becomes that little bit easier. Permit me, on behalf of the people of Trinidad and Tobago at this time, to thank all of those in the Ministry of the Attorney General and Legal Affairs, Ministry of National Security, Ministry of Finance, and the other areas of government who worked hard under the stewardship and the leadership of the Attorney General to bring us back into alignment for compliance. So we're no longer at immediate risk of being blacklisted. But Trinidad and Tobago, it is persons like you and me who are law-abiding that would suffer if we let these few who are engaging in these acts of money laundering have us all suffer and we lose our correspondent banking status, etc. And this bill here today is just one of this government's initiatives to ensure we fulfill our international obligations. I don't want to be preemptive. I don't want to predict what's going to happen in the future, but Madam Speaker, permit me, now is an appropriate time as well, I believe, to just tell Trinidad and Tobago, it is in this vein and in this light that we intend to move with the Revenue Authority, and it is that we intend to move with the gaming legislation, because it is high time that law-abiding citizens, through the parliamentarians here, the 41 members, not only 23, but the 41 members here, do all that we can to take the fight against illicit activity, drugs, money laundering, to fight counterterrorism, and to do the things that make it more difficult for those who engage in a life of crime that is always funded by money. And that's our obligation and duty here today. And that's what this bill is about, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this bill, we're addressing amendments to 5 different pieces of legislation in one blow. We're dealing with the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act, the Customs Act, and the Exchange Control Act. Madam Speaker, if you would permit me to just give a very brief report of where we are with respect to our international obligations and why this piece of legislation is necessary for Trinidad and Tobago, not for PNM administration, not for those only on this side, but for every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago to be seen as a patriot and someone who can hold their head in pride in any metropolitan country of this world as having participated in the fight against money laundering and terrorism. Trinidad and Tobago's fourth round mutual evaluation report was completed in November 2015. In this respect, we were rated as follows in recommendations, and immediate outcomes were listed for us to comply with. This was in November 2015. We were not yet 2 months old. They had under recommendation 3, the area is money laundering offenses, that we had to get to be rated largely compliant. Higher risk countries, recommendation 19, we were partially compliant. Recommendation 27, power of supervisors, largely compliant. Recommendation 28, regulation of supervision of DNFBPs, rated partially compliant. There were a number of them, Madam Speaker, where we were rated partially compliant and some moderate in effectiveness, etc. Following that fourth round MER, Trinidad and Tobago was placed in enhanced follow-up by CFATF, and thereafter had to work assiduously to meet the referral criteria to enter the pool of countries to be monitored by FATF International Cooperation Review Group, as well as work with them for the prioritization of criteria based on financial sector assets. The ICRG monitoring was from June 2016 until June 2017. FATF and the ICRG established, Madam Speaker, an America's joint group to consider whether specified countries referred to, such as Trinidad and Tobago, had made what was deemed to be substantial progress in rectifying the deficiencies identified in our mutual evaluation reports. As part of the review process, Madam Speaker, on the 6th of September 2017, a face-to-face meeting was held in Miami. And in fact, the participants who were there, and again, I thank the Attorney General and those who were there, some of whom are in the public gallery, actually faced Hurricane Irma and the effects of Hurricane Irma, and some of them were stranded. But they went to represent Trinidad and Tobago at a face-to-face meeting in Miami to meet with this joint group and to discuss what Trinidad and Tobago has done and what we're required to do. The joint group considered Trinidad and Tobago's first follow-up report, which was presented at CFATF in the May plenary of 2017. 2 updates were provided, the discussions at the face-to-face meeting and the comments on the final draft of that joint group report were had. On October 29, 2017, again, the Attorney General led a team to the FATF plenary in Buenos Aires, Argentina, to defend this country's position with respect to that joint America's group assessment of our progress and to address the deficiencies that continue to be identified and highlighted in our MER. Madam Speaker, I'm pleased to say that FATF and CFATF have said that the post-observation period, through their post-observation period report, showed that the government's strategy of operationalizing laws that had been underutilized has paid off. Madam Speaker, what that refers to, and the public would have seen it, is for the first time, using the anti-money laundering laws, this administration pushed the FIB and assisted the FIB, the FIU, the police service, etc., for the prosecution of money laundering offenses, some of which reside in the gaming industry. And that is why we see it as so important to tie this into the gaming industry as well. And they have said, the joint group has recognized we made sufficient progress in a number of areas, with notable progress in some other areas. However, Madam Speaker, they identify that further work needs to be done to adequately remedy the remaining deficiencies, including legislative steps, which we already had in train. This is what we're talking about, Madam Speaker. So for us to fulfill our international obligations and not get blacklisted and not get put into the gray zone, and to allow us to hold our heads with pride in our financial sector and as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker, it is important that every member of this House pledges their support to this type of legislation. On the last occasion, we heard a lot of nervous, I can only describe it diplomatically as nervous suggestions coming from the other side. During my contribution this afternoon, Madam Speaker, I would like to assure the public of Trinidad and Tobago and every law-abiding citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, including my friends and colleagues on the other side who fall into that category, that this bill does not trample on anyone's rights. This bill does not affect anyone's private and personal rights. Once they are in a process where they abide by the law, they make the declarations they're supposed to make. They're not hiding money in anybody else's name. They're not hiding any money where it shouldn't be hidden. And they're prepared to deal with all of the laws that now internationally apply. Because you see, Madam Speaker, if you want to bank in other metropolitan countries, there are a number of regulations, there are a number of tick boxes that you must meet. Trinidad and Tobago should be no different. This administration is doing all that it can to ensure that the law-abiding citizens of Trinidad and Tobago operate in a safe environment, Madam Speaker. This bill is for us to fulfill these international obligations, and several key steps are contained in this miscellaneous provisions bill, with others in the bill that will be put before this House shortly. Our POPR results also take us significantly closer to the point of being able to exit the enhanced follow-up, with the next opportunity to mark this progress being at May 2018 CFATF plenary, which will in turn feed into our reporting to FATF ICRG in October 2018. So, Madam Speaker, my friends on the other sides, my colleagues on this side, population of Trinidad and Tobago, we have a deadline with respect to our international financial obligations to clean up the system. The first deadline is in May of next year, and then the ultimate test is in October of next year. And this government will do all that it can, respecting persons' rights, to ensure that we fulfill those obligations and we take us out of this enhanced follow-up status. We don't want to be there, Madam Speaker. This government has from the beginning given high priority to our anti-money laundering and to the combat of foreign terrorist fighting, financing. We have put that high on our agenda and we've prioritized it. And in fact, I can say here without fear of contradiction as an administration, a number of cabinet members have been actively meeting with the United States, Britain, Canada, France, and these other countries to ensure that the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago are safer when they go to sleep at night. We've rebuilt the relationships with some of these persons. In fact, it is very irresponsible sometimes, the utterances, both in and outside of the House, by those on the other side when it comes to the talk about terrorism. Because the fact is, all that they're saying and they're pushing has no basis in fact behind it. I am happy to say that in addition to this bill, we have been working with our allies for the provision of information, for the tracking of illicit money and funds that may be going to finance foreign terrorist fighters. And we will do everything we can as an administration to put an end to it and to stamp it out wherever we find it. And that starts with this bill. And that starts with the fight via legislative moves such as this, Madam Speaker, against illicit proceeds and just making it generally difficult, not for law-abiding citizens, but for those who flout the law and for those who want to put Trinidad in a bad light. And without fear of contradiction, I can say here today, Trinidad and Tobago, this administration takes it very seriously. We will not speak out of turn. We will not divulge national security matters that shouldn't be in the public domain. But rest assured, we have been working with our law enforcement agencies, including the bodies that track and trace money, to fight terrorism as a country, Trinidad and Tobago. And today, I'd like to use the opportunity again, Madam Speaker, to thank all of those law enforcement officers in whatever roles they play, be it the Special Branch, be it the SSA, be it the FIB in the police service, just those policemen who are here in Parliament, all others, for doing all that they can to protect and serve Trinidad and Tobago. And as a citizen, I thank them here today for that as well. Now to the bill, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the first part of this bill deals with mutual assistance in criminal matters. And on the last occasion, we heard a lot of babbling and gurgling with respect to what this really is to do. And it seemed as though there was some fear and some nervousness. But what I would like to say on this occasion is all this amendment does, and mutual assistance in criminal matters is part of your international obligation, is that we can make a request of other persons that other countries we have a treaty with, and they can make of us through legal means for documentation that presides in Trinidad and Tobago. So you want to find out about certain documentation that resides in Trinidad and Tobago. Great Britain can write us, the United States can write us, France can write us, a host of countries using this piece of legislation, Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act. What it also does is it makes it easier for Trinidad and Tobago not only to fulfill its international obligations, but in the following the money process. Those who have tried to hide money that rightfully belongs to the taxpayers and the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago in foreign jurisdictions, this assists the law enforcement agencies in tracking, following, and bringing that money back to Trinidad and Tobago. And I ask the question now, not rhetorically, but for a clear answer by every single parliamentarian. Why would you want to resist that? All the amendment that is being made here does is it removes, under clause 20, the section 22 of the Act, which is subject to this section, a request for assistance. Such a request shall be refused if, in the opinion of the central authority, it had to do with tax. So all we're doing here now is we're taking tax offenses, anything related to tax and the payment of tax, the collection of tax, out of that basket that the central authority can refuse to provide the information. That is in keeping directly with our obligations for the Americans under FATCA, is keeping in our obligations with Global Forum, and just generally, Madam Speaker, why would Trinidad and Tobago want to protect anybody who is evading tax payments in any other jurisdiction in the world? This is not going to affect persons who abide by the law. All this is doing, Madam Speaker, and this amendment that is being made is saying for the tax offenses, we can now provide that information, and there's no automatic or discretionary, well, there will remain a discretion, but there's no automatic blocking for Trinidad and Tobago providing that. The IRS has found accounts of their citizens, they think, in Trinidad, and we had one like that recently with someone who was in the gaming industry. They can write through a recognized international process for an MLAT and request that we in Trinidad and Tobago go to court and do what it is we can to help them and to assist them. That's why it's called Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters. So tax is now being deleted from that area, and we can now freely provide that information. No need to resist that. The second clause of this bill before us, the third clause, sorry, Madam Speaker, of this bill before us, seeks to make the prosecution for offenses under the Proceeds of Crime Act simpler. I think this was a particular clause on the last occasion that seemed to have stirred a hornet's nest. Citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, there is no attempt being made by this government and this administration to influence any criminal matter whatsoever. I say that without fear of contradiction. If you have breached the law, then you have a right to be afraid. If you've broken the criminal law, you have a right to be afraid. If you've engaged in corruption, bid rigging, cartel behavior, if you've gotten bribes, you've gotten things through conspiracy, you have every right to be afraid. Because there is no citizen who is a right-thinking citizen or a civic-minded citizen of Trinidad and Tobago that would block and protect for anybody in that whatsoever. This amendment, in particular under the Proceeds of Crime Act, is dealing with money laundering, and in particular Section 44 of the Act. And what it is said, what it is doing now, is it is making money laundering now triable either way. It is no longer only triable indictably, which means in the criminal assizes of the High Court. It is now giving the law enforcement authorities and also someone who is accused the opportunity to say how they would like the matter to be tried, for it to be tried in the magistrate's court, for it to be tried in the criminal courts. And my friend for St. Augustine, who practices in that arena, in the criminal law arena, I am sure would say that an offense that is triable either way gives, I don't want to say your clients, but gives those who are charged and accused an opportunity. It gives them an opportunity to say, I'll go through the summary court, the magistrate's court, or I'll go before a jury in the High Court. This is with respect to money laundering. This is respect to crimes that have been found after a period of following the money. Money laundering is, and right now as we have regulations in Trinidad and Tobago, you declare where your money comes from, the source of funds, etc. But there is an amount of money laundering, we believe, that has been taking place and continues to take place. In fact, in the United States, it is one of the acts that is used all of the time. Because once persons don't declare how much money it is, where it comes from, it gives their federal authorities, the FBI and others, immediate ability to go after people, to charge people, to indict people, and this type of thing. Why would we want it any different in Trinidad and Tobago? In Trinidad and Tobago, it is very simple. You go, you fill out a form, you say how much money it is, you say where you've deposited it, etc., etc. But if you're caught now utilizing various people to deposit sums all over the place, etc., why wouldn't the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago want that to be declared a crime? Why wouldn't the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago want that on summary conviction, as we're proposing here, the fine to be $25 million, that's the maximum, or to imprisonment for 15 years? We are seeing the effects now in 2017 of what went on prior to. And some of the difficulties we're facing in this country, and we're coming across it every week, is because of money laundering that took place. It's because of, bring the check for me. It's because of, this is how much money to pay for that contract. I'm now standing in the House. I've said this outside of the House. This administration is not going to tolerate that by anyone. So choose if you've engaged in money laundering, summary conviction in the magistrate's court, and a maximum fine of $25 million, imprisonment of 15 years, or you want to go before a jury in the High Court, a fine of $50 million, imprisonment for 30 years. I'll tell you something. Some of the money flows we've seen, that's small change for some of these people. Madam Speaker, what we've also done here is, so Madam Speaker, that's to do with the proceeds of crime and in particular the offense of money laundering. The next area that we're seeking to amend under this bill is the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago. And Madam Speaker, what we're doing is we're seeking to broaden it because the world has changed. When the world first started looking at following the money and fighting money laundering, etc., there was something called the Egmont Group. And it was a small group that was literally doing the work. But now that's broadened and people associated with it. What we're doing under the definition is we're saying if you're associated, you're credited by it, then you're caught under this net. So we don't have to keep putting people in a schedule.
Spain North, St. Anne's West, your original speaking time is now expired. You're entitled to 15 more minutes if you wish.
Thank you very
much.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, the changes that we're proposing under the Financial Intelligence Unit is to make it a more efficient body. The Financial Intelligence Unit is the body charged with ensuring we fulfill our international obligations to do with money laundering and fighting crimes, to do with money and this type of thing. And what we're doing here, again, and I can't see how one would object to this, one of the amendments, for example, is if a jurisdiction has fallen foul of their international obligations, we now in Trinidad and Tobago, the FIU has the ability to publish that in the Gazette and newspapers. So to publish, and that is the only way it could work. Madam Speaker, earlier I had alluded to a conference and a preparatory meeting I went to, sitting with G20 and other big IMF, etc., planning how to fight corruption, how the world should fight corruption. Trinidad and Tobago's contribution to that was as follows. In addition to legislation, one of the difficulties that's faced is very often those who breach the law and who are guilty of the offenses are provided with many ways, many outs. It seems to be easier for them than for those who are trying to prosecute. There's something called name and shame, and this is really part of naming and shaming. So if you as a country take a decision, you're not going to work with the rest of us in the world to fight corruption, we'll publish you in the newspapers after you go through a process. That's all that is. Then there's some other things here that now give the FIU the opportunity and the ability to execute their work better. And now we're saying that if you willfully obstruct a police officer in the exercise of your duties, when they're pursuing inquiries under the FIU legislation, it's going to be more criminalized. If you give false or misleading information, that is now criminalized, and we've reversed the burden of proof there as well. Again, we're increasing the fines, because the truth is, Madam Speaker, if the fines and the penalties don't move with the times, they're ineffective. People smirk at them. They turn up their noses at them. And as I say, this all ties back into our international obligations for us to get out of that enhanced area. The next area we look at, Madam Speaker, is the Customs Act. And Madam Speaker, what we're seeing in the Customs Act, one of the interesting areas, we're having a lot of crime now, violent crime committed with the use of firearms. And we are finding that firearms are being brought into our country, including at certain ports that should be restricted ports. Firearms, holsters, scopes, all of these types of things. This government has said it's going to do all that it can to assist the law enforcement authorities in the fight against it. What we're doing here is we're saying that for firearm, ammunition, bulletproof vests, firearm accessories, including lasers, lights, holsters, scopes, tools for the purpose of maintaining a firearm, except with the written permission of the Commissioner of Police, or unless you are a firearm user's license holder. You can't bring those items in. Why would anybody object to that? That must be something that every right-thinking member of Parliament is going to support. That's one of the areas. We've also broadened the area of jurisdiction for the customs authorities. And what we're seeing as well now for customs authorities, quite importantly, is that if people have breached the Customs Act, because remember, customs duties are charged on items coming into the country. We're telling persons who import items, you now have an obligation to keep your books for 7 years. And then in another area, we're saying you have obligations. Every officer should cause to be kept at such space as the comptroller may direct documents, books, records, other information for a period of 6 years. Persons have asked, why are you increasing the time for the keeping of these documents? The answer is simple. In the fight against crime, you want to have a longer period of time. If you're being protected, give those a longer opportunity to find these crimes, and it actually sits directly in line with our tax laws. You have 6 years limitation period with your tax laws. We're doing the same thing. We're bringing it in line with the Customs Act. Madam Speaker, the last area, and I think the member for Sipario was very interested in this area on the last occasion. She intervened when the Attorney General was piloting the bill. This is to do with what we call bearer notes. And this is under the Exchange Control Import and Export Order and the Exchange Control Acts. Bearer negotiable instruments. Every country in the world, and this is one of the things we are obligated to do in our international treaties and obligations, is now saying, not that you can't move with the notes, you know. So there are bonds that are called bearer bonds. Once you present it, it's like the old traveler's checks. Even I recall as a young child, when you travel, your parents had traveler's checks. They just present it at a store. They get the equivalent in cash. You use it to pay bills. There are things called bearer notes. What is happening, and it's actually very interesting, is a lot of people who engage in illegal activity internationally walk around with briefcases of bearer notes. Because what it means is, once you present that to a financial institution, $1 million US is like $1 million US bill. And it doesn't have anything on it saying present to Stuart Young or payable to Stuart Young. Literally, you walk around with these pieces of paper like a traveler's check, and once you present it, the person is obligated to give you the money. What we're saying is, if you have any such instruments over $20,000, you have to declare it.
Just like
Who would have a problem, Madam Speaker, with that? Who would be traveling without? Well, I know who has a problem, but I'm not engaging in that here today. Who would be against someone declaring it? So all we're saying is, if you have over $20,000, when you're coming into Trinidad and Tobago in these instruments, declare it. What's wrong with that? When you go to the United States, you see on their forms, you go to England, you see on their forms there's a limit. If you're walking with X amount of cash over that, declare it. And there's a reason for that, as I'm being reminded by the Prime Minister. Why wouldn't you want to say where the money has come from? Why wouldn't you want to say and declare how much money you're traveling with? You have nothing to fear from the law enforcement authorities. But is it because you have to explain your money? Is it because you have to explain where that came from and you have to fulfill a reasonableness obligation? Madam Speaker, this government is going to do everything it can in this term and as this administration to fight the scourge of corruption. And we will take the abuse inside and outside Parliament. But we will not be deterred. And I can assure every citizen of Trinidad and Tobago here today that this is being done for the future generations and to try and bring us back from the brink of where we stand and to make us once again a proud nation that is not engaging in corruption at every level. And in ending and in concluding, Madam Speaker, I put the country on notice once again. Look on very carefully at those who are the loudest objectors to these types of legislation, to this type of legislation and others like this. Those who would oppose things like a revenue authority, those who would oppose explain your wealth, follow your money, etc. Because, Madam Speaker, they may be the ones affected by making this an easier thing for law enforcement authorities. Madam Speaker, with those words, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to contribute today.
Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I take the opportunity to make a contribution on this bill, an act to amend the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act, the Customs Act, and the Exchange Control Act. The acts that are to be amended are by and large acts that were put into the law books of Trinidad and Tobago by a previous UNC administration. I simply want to point that out. In other words, a government under a UNC administration initiated these acts and actioned the legislation and put them into law. And this piece of legislation now being amended, you might say, is an amendment of a contribution by a previous UNC administration to orderly international engagement for the sovereign state of Trinidad and Tobago with other nations of the world. And this was not the only piece of legislation. Other legislation or pieces of legislation contributed were the Judicial Review Act, the Freedom of Information Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Integrity in Public Life Act, which in fact was initiated by the NAR administration and amended by the UNC administration, the Equal Opportunities Act, and I think the Data Protection Act as well. This piece of legislation being amended, or these pieces, is to deal, as the member for Port of Spain North St. Anne's West said, they're being amended to deal with money launderers, to deal with terrorists, to deal with illicit money, and to deal with the proceeds of criminal conduct. Who can be against strong legislation for these things? Any reasonable person, any law-abiding citizen, any serious parliamentarian would support these things. They would also support strong penalties for crimes of this nature. Nobody would be against that. So it is easy to support the general intent of the original bills and any amendments that would strengthen the resolve today as far as crime is concerned. But the question that must be asked as we interrogate this bill is, do these amendments do that? If the amendments strengthen the original purpose and intent of the bills that are being amended, it makes sense to say it's fine to support the bill. But if it deviates from it, if there is a gap between the stated intention and the reality of its impact, then we must question it. And that is the issue here today. And I recognize the good intentions of the member for Port of Spain North St. Anne's West in his contribution. I appreciate the fact that he is after criminal conduct and the proceeds of criminal conduct, but we need to see what will be the impact of these 6 clauses, I think, in the bill that make amendments to existing law. So let us examine these 6 clauses. The 6 clauses amend 5 pieces of legislation. And the bill, of course, itemizes the pieces of legislation in the explanation of the bill. Clause 1 is not an issue because it does not engage any issue, so there is no need to interrogate anything there. But Clause 2 asks for the deletion of a section which results, and the member for Port of Spain North St. Anne's West talked about the fact that Trinidad and Tobago was a sovereign state in a shrinking world. And this deletion of that section could well involve the surrender of sovereign authority in relation to other Commonwealth states. And that is not a simple matter, it is a complex matter. The mutual assistance in criminal matters is in fact about the issue of extradition. Extradition is an extraordinary matter. It is not something that happens every day. It is something that happens under specific conditions and usually rather rarely. Now, as I understand it, and I can be corrected by any speaker on the other side, extraditions are done under a central authority under the Office of the Attorney General. And in terms of my awareness, and I am prepared to admit that I'm wrong if I'm wrong, there is not now an established director in the central authority in the AG's office. Is there the other, if I'm wrong, okay, well, if I'm wrong about it, and it is correct that you have a director, that is fine. And then, is there not also other legislation, are there not other pieces of legislation that relate to this matter of extradition. So the pertinent question I want to ask is, why do we want to surrender this discretion in the legislation by deleting this clause in this matter? And I want to ask whether there are other jurisdictions within the Commonwealth system that have given up this right. I looked at the Jamaican legislation. I don't see that right given up. All right, in the Jamaican legislation, I'm not aware that this particular clause which you are deleting is in fact given up as a right by Jamaica. I was not able to look at the Barbados legislation, but my understanding is that that has not been taken out of the Barbados legislation either. Again, if I am incorrect, I am prepared to be corrected. And if you can provide that information, it would be helpful. So the issue of why are we doing it? What is the rationale for it? Why do you want to surrender a discretion that is a matter of right as a sovereign state among nations? Is a question that needs to be answered to justify the deletion of this particular clause. And secondly, if we are doing it and we have a justification and other countries have not done it, I want that also explained. What is it that makes us want to do this and create a justification for it when other countries are not prepared to do it? So that is an issue I will leave for a response. Clause 3 seeks to simplify the process to prosecute offenses related to money laundering. How does it do so? It does so, Madam Speaker, by making money laundering both an indictable as well as a summary offense. I am not a lawyer, but I went and tried to find out what is the difference. And what it also, one is before judge and jury, and the other one is before a magistrate in the magistrate court. I make it simple so that people like me who are not versed in the law or who are not lawyers, who are citizens, will understand. So it's either a judge and jury or a magistrate's court. And it also increases the penalties for a money laundering conviction. Now, the issue is, why do we want to change it? Does it give a greater option to the person who is charged or who comes before the court? If it gives a greater option, in other words, if it gives a greater choice to the person coming before the court, well, it makes sense once the choice is in the hands of the citizen and the choice is not made for him or determined by another. The charges, the money charges, fines, are hefty, 25 million and 50 million, but they are indeed for grave offenses, and they are also for, it is also, the numbers are the limits, not the required amount. So it is possible for someone to be charged less than 25 or less than 50 if they are found guilty. So, but what is the issue that I think we need to interrogate? I think we need to acknowledge that we're living in Trinidad and Tobago. And we need to acknowledge that at the present time, there are all kinds of issues surrounding the magistracy and the judiciary and the justice system in Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't think it is too bold to ask who appoints the magistrates. I don't think that it is too bold to ask, can fairness and justice be guaranteed under the current system? I don't think it is too bold to ask, is the court system under the magistracy efficient, effective, and above reproach? I don't think it is too bold to ask, is the process of appointment of magistrates in this country above reproach. So I am asking the question, if perhaps there are flaws in our system involving the magistracy, in the whole structure and determination of the system, and if there are flaws even in the judge and jury system, because I remember the Attorney General bringing a bill here in which he fought very fiercely for judge-only trials. And there was a rather active debate on that particular matter. And these matters, so if there are flaws in this system, should these matters not come up for question, and should they not be fully debated? Is there not a general feeling, Madam Speaker, in the country that things are not right today with the judiciary, with the magistracy, with the system of justice in Trinidad and Tobago? Are there not questions around the office of the Chief Justice himself? Are we trying to apply strong law for and of first world countries here to a system that is not well prepared, to a system that is not ready, to a system that is not up to mark? Is our justice system likely to be fixed soon, Madam Speaker? Are we going to significantly improve case preparation, case management?
Remember, while I understand what you're trying to do, I would not allow you to make this into a debate about the criminal justice system. Okay, so that I would like you to keep close to the particular amendments which are seeking to be made with this legislation.
This amendment, this particular amendment here, Madam Speaker, has to do with if the choice of an individual for having his case heard in the magistracy or by the judiciary. It also increases the fines in the system. And I am asking the question about justice and fairness in the system and flaws in the existing system. And I'm asking the question, if we want to meet international obligations, whether or not we are transferring, in other words, importing systems that can be easily applied in well-functioning system to a less than well-functioning system in Trinidad and Tobago. I mean, I am speaking to the issues under debate. And the question I'm asking is that if we are going to have quick resolution of all of these issues that, in fact, are easily identifiable as flaws in our judicial and legal system and justice system in Trinidad and Tobago. But I leave that. The Clause 4 has to do with changes in the definition of the Egmont Group. Up to this point, the Egmont Group is defined by our legislation as 154 countries. If we make the amendment that is proposed for this bill, it now becomes that the group of financial intelligence units which subscribe to the statement of purpose and its principles, rather than simply a reference to the group as a whole. So the statement of purpose and principles becomes the important matter in this legislation. And the statement of purpose and principles, which is relevant here for this legislation, is the free exchange between financial intelligence units for money laundering and terrorism financing cases. So that the emphasis is on the free exchange of information among members of the Egmont Group. So the pertinent matter here is the easy exchange. It's not the existence of the Egmont Group or the exchange of information. It is the free and easy exchange of information. So in clause 4.8.3, we have amendments for the further empowerment of the FIU. So the FIU as an institution is being strengthened, the Financial Intelligence Unit. And the question I think is pertinent here is how much or more information and what information will this allow the FIU to collect? And how would the role of the FIU change in relation to the banking sector? And the reason that I ask that is because, as far as I know, what happens in the banking sector now is that if the banking sector recognizes or recognizes a suspicious transaction or determines that there is reason to think that a transaction which comes through the banking system is a suspicious transaction, it then flags that to the FIU. And therefore, the FIU would have all the information from the financial system based on the laws that we have now. So if the attempt here is to strengthen the FIU to get more information or to be more robust in its use of information, I think that would require some kind of explanation that is more detailed than has been given us by the member for Port of Spain North or St. Anne's West. We need to understand clearly what is the objective and impact of the strengthening of this piece of legislation here and what it will do that it cannot do now and what is the difference that it would make. Because I have the relevant part of the legislation here, Financial Intelligence Unit of Trinidad and Tobago Act number 11 of 2009. And I have the functions and powers of the FIU. And I see the powers. And what is being asked to be put in here is trends and typologies. And secondly, what is being asked is that it will be able to act on its own volition. The FIU will be able to act on its own volition, that is to say, without being asked to respond to a request. So the question I think that is relevant is, what will this change mean in reality? What does it mean? What matters do we need to take into account in the statement of purpose and its principles that relate to, first of all, information exchange between financial intelligence units having to do with money laundering and terrorism? And why is it desirable? I think we need a very clear information, a piece of information, and we need clarity on this matter. Because the reason I am asking this question, Madam Speaker, is because I want to know, and it's important for citizens to know, will the FIU become more intrusive? Will it violate privacy rights? Will it violate the normal contract between the bank and the customer? What would trigger the right of the FIU to act on its own volition? These are not questions of fear or trepidation. These are legitimate questions about the functioning of these institutions in a democracy and under a constitution that guarantees individual rights, civil liberties, and privacy rights. Now, the issue of what does on their own motion mean? I said their own volition. but it's the same thing. What does on their own motion mean? Does it mean that someone in the FIU, undesignated or designated, can act on his or her own behalf to provide information? And will this be on the basis of formal arrangements or on an informal basis? I think these things need to be clarified. It's a civilized society we live in. It's a democracy we live in. And while we make strong laws and we have strong penalties, we must know very clearly how they work. Now, why and when would this on your own motion initiative be triggered? I think it is important that the conditions be clarified. And then you have new subsections 18G. You see, it is not this alone. When you remember, we have 5 bills here. And you're amending 5 bills. And when you finish with this amendment, which is one piece of legislation, you have just put together a panoply of 6 pieces of legislation to deal with these matters. And therefore, in the integrated and strategic use of these pieces of information, of legislation, the impact could be rather significant. So I asked the question, in Section 18G, for instance, in the FIU Trinidad and Tobago Act. Now, this was not there in the legislation before. This is being put in now. Section, 18G 1. It requires a person to provide information, documents, or explanation on any information. It would provide for a warrant, all right? So it would request information of a person. It can then seek this information by warrant, I suspect, but it does not say for non-compliance. And these things need to be clarified. And thirdly, it can send police to get the information because of non-compliance if there is reason for if the institution feels, as the FIU, that there is an attempt to obstruct justice. Now, how are these decisions made? You know? And then there's a clause which talks about protection from self-incrimination. But that is a very, very complex matter. I mean, we see it in congressional inquiries having to do with the US all the time. And this matter of self-incrimination and the ability to incriminate oneself or not to incriminate ourselves is a serious matter. And remember, in our system, a person is always assumed to be innocent. That is the whole essence of democracy that derives out of British law and British tradition, that one is presumed innocent until found guilty. So, on the basis of what suspicion, what are the reasonable grounds for suspicion? It is issues such as these, Madam Speaker, and the issues that they raise which prompt us as a responsible opposition to advocate for the referral of this piece of legislation to a joint select committee. I think we had the issue of FATCA, which was fought all the way along until it actually went to the Joint Select Committee. And when we did return from the Joint Select Committee, even though there were controversies over the manner of procedure in the Joint Select Committee, we ended up with better and superior legislation. And when you have issues like this, which have to do with the violation potentially of individual rights, the violation potentially of privacy rights, and the strengthening of institutions to give powers which now allow for police interrogation and subclauses having to do with self-incrimination, In other words, they come to your home, they ask you questions, and what do you do? So in this situation, you can respond when you reply. Okay? I am just raising these for the ordinary citizen to understand what is at stake here. So I hope that our request for a joint select committee on matters that are very, very controversial, which require clarification, which require specification, which also require precision in the writing of the law, I hope that these matters will be taken seriously by the government, that they will listen to them, and they will respond positively for our requests, to go to a joint select committee and bring the legislation back here, and by consensus we'll pass it. It is the issues that this legislation raises, having to do with human rights, privacy rights, and provisions which can lead to violation, which prompt us as a responsible opposition also to point out to the Attorney General and the government that a 3/5 majority is required for this legislation. So, a joint select committee is a facilitative mechanism to build consensus to make a better law. It is very easily established by this House. It actually works, and we have the precedent for it. There are precedents which indicate that the Joint Select Committee is a very good place to resolve contentious issues. The referral of this piece of legislation to the JSC should not, in my view, be resisted unnecessarily. I don't know what the government would gain from resisting it. There is no reason to. And the bill is only 6 clauses. It can be handled in quick time. The 3/5 majority issue, I want to say, it has to do with Section 5(2) of the Constitution, and I have it here. Thank you for the hardbound copy. And in 5(2)A, Parliament may not authorize or effect the arbitrary detention, imprisonment, or exile of any person. And I think that the one issue here that goes close to that, I'm not saying that it does, is the powers of the police to move into your system, which was not there before. Yes. I think we need to examine that.
Honourable Member for Caroni Central, your original 30 minutes is now expired. You're entitled to 15 more minutes if you wish, and you may proceed if you wish.
I'd like to. And if that does not apply, Attorney General, what about to authorize any authority to deprive an individual from protection against self-incrimination? How do you do that? Attorney General, do you know
Are you prepared to give way? Attorney General.
Thank you, Honourable Member, for giving way. I just encourage the Honourable Member to perhaps reflect in the last submission upon the express statement in the bill where the right against self-incrimination is specifically preserved. Thank you.
It is preserved in the bill. It is mentioned in the bill as preserved. But I'm saying we all deal with context, the practical nature of the context. You have a situation, a police comes to your place, wherever it is, your office or whatever, and basically begins the process of self-incrimination. You do not have a lawyer with you. I always remember making a joke with a friend of mine who once came to my assistance. And I said, but if you didn't do anything, you don't have anything to worry about. And that lawyer said to me, he said, you know how many innocent men have been hanged for murder? It is something to reflect on. Be reasonable. Be reasonable. In my view, Madam Speaker, a number of these issues, so we are asking for a joint select committee, and we are asking also for the recognition of the 2/3 majority. 3/5 majority, sorry. A number of these issues need to be properly interrogated, hence our advocacy for these things. the government may say that we can resolve this matter at committee stage, but the evidence will show that the only place the views of the opposition are taken adequately into account is in a joint select committee.
Correct.
And the joint select committee is only agreed to when a 3/5 majority is required. Whenever the bill involves a simple majority, whatever the amendments we propose, they are ignored entirely. Clause 5 is amendment of the Customs Act. And in amendment of the Customs Act, I want to say this, and I hope the two lawyers on that side will pay attention, the Attorney General and the Minister in the office. This says that it will redefine waters of Trinidad and Tobago in accordance with Section 6 of the Territorial Sea Act. Now, I had reason to examine the proposed bill for self-government for Tobago and to make a presentation recently in Tobago. And that bill actually changes the nature of territorial waters, both for the island of Trinidad and the island of Tobago. And it therefore has serious, very serious implications for what territorial waters mean. And therefore, I don't think that we can simply make a decision on something like this in this legislation without interrogating very carefully what are the implications, were there in fact to be a bill passed which changes the waters in that way.
Yeah, but remember, I will remind you again, the rule against anticipation, what we're dealing with is now.
Okay. The second issue here is the adjustment of value of goods within 6 years and the immediate payment and determination of adjustment of no release of goods. Again, the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West mentioned the Revenue Authority. And again, from an examination of the documents available in relation to the Revenue Authority, I think that the board and the CEO and the deputy CEO of that institution will be appointed by the political directorate. And therefore, that is a matter that would be of some concern to us. Section 45, no importation of firearms. Now, the member did explain this, and I was trying to follow him. But I thought we had laws that prevented the importation of firearms already. Yeah, and the accessories to the firearm. We don't have that? Is that the purpose? Okay.
Members, 1 minute. If it is, member, while you're on your legs, you wish an answer, and it's forthcoming from the other side, it is up to you to give way. But I can't allow the crosstalk as if it's a conversation.
Madam Speaker, I'm hoping that if I raise the issues, whoever responds will deal with the issue. So, for the importation of these things, I mean, we have a lot of problems with guns in this country. We have issues with licensed firearms and the issuance of them. We have issues with unlicensed firearms and the proliferation of them. And I would hope that the element of the bill introduced here, the clauses in the bill introduced here, will tighten rather than loosen the system for the proliferation of guns in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, Madam Speaker, without the right framework, without the right context clearly defined, without checks and balances, these can be dangerous provisions. I am not saying that they are. And I am not saying that that is the government's intention. But I am saying that there is a wide gap between stated intentions and possible uses of the elements of these pieces of legislation. You have a situation, I did not say I am opposed, I said we want to go to the JSC and we want a 2/3 majority. In this business of the customs, the brokers, the business relations, there is potential for manipulation of the system. There is always potential for bribery and corruption, for political interference, for undue influence, for business alliances, conspiracies for the illegal entry of goods, and even subversion, because guns have come into this country which facilitated a coup, an attempted coup in Trinidad and Tobago. And therefore, I want to say that it is precisely because of these issues that we require the interrogation atmosphere and the airing of the issues in a joint select committee. The final issue is Clause 6, which has to do with the central bank. Now, as I understand it, again, in the banking system, if you buy an instrument and you take it to some other country, and you have to declare it to the bank, of course, the bank will base it on your source of funds. And if you take it to another country, you have to declare it when you go there. The first thing that I notice is that the amounts here are different, let's say, to the United States or Canada. So why don't we resolve that once and for all? So that in traveling for the Western Hemisphere, we have one number. That's the first thing. So I think for the United States, Canada, it is $10,000, US dollars. So we could settle that. But the second issue is when these transactions happen and you declare them, the bank would then, in their reports to the central bank, as a matter of course, provide the information to the central bank. Why do you want the intrusion now of the central bank in this legislation over and beyond its existing function? There is no necessity for that. And this is what concerns us, is the overriding extended control of the state apparatus in the system. So on this matter, I'm saying let us make it $10,000 like the US, so that in the Western Hemisphere it is very clear whether you're bringing it to Trinidad or you're taking it out. And secondly, let the banking system work and the central bank operate as it is supposed to under the legislation which now governs the central bank. And I have the Exchange Control Act here in my hand. I think when you examine the legislation properly, and not ideologically or not in terms of government intent, but clinically to try to tease out of it what are the possibilities that could emerge from this, you see that you end up being at a loss for clarity in this bill. I don't think there is any decent person in this country or elsewhere who is not against money laundering, corruption, against terrorism, criminal conduct. But what is the value that is added by these amendments? What is the real value of this bill? Will it lead to arrests and conviction and the reduction of white-collar crime? What action has been taken on the basis of FIU reports and their flagging of suspicious transactions so far? How many corrupt criminals will be brought before the law by these amendments? How many have been brought to justice so far under FIU reports? How will law enforcement improve? How will the criminal justice system benefit? How will the system be enhanced? We on this side are very strong on taking steps to address white-collar crime. Our problem is that nothing is happening now under the legislation, in our view, unless there is something that we don't quite understand, will do nothing to improve enforcement. What is the record of enforcement so far on white-collar crime, in spite of this relatively strong legislation now on the books? There is in this bill well, I mentioned I was corrected on the issue of central authority, and I concede. So if the Attorney General says that we do have the central authority and that is in place, I will not deal with those issues anymore. Madam Speaker, the legislation, as I said, I have no reason to doubt the good intentions of either the Attorney General or the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, but there are very, very complicated issues that arise in this bill. The issues really have to do with a functioning democracy. They really have to do with the authority and power of the state. They have to do with sovereign responsibility of a nation state, and they have to do with that responsibility exercised in what the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West calls a shrinking world, but which is really a very highly integrated world system, especially in the area of finance. The issue of money laundering, of crime, of international terrorism, those things are very real, and we need to pay attention to it. The member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West talked about the meeting in the UK, and he talked about Trinidad and Tobago being the only small country there. We recognize that. Last night I was at a function in Chaguanas for scholarship winners and SEA winners, and the acting US ambassador was there, and he said very openly, the charge d'affaires, he said, listen, I don't conduct US business, right? He said he was the acting ambassador.
Members. While I welcome the camaraderie, I just want to remind members of Standing Order 53. Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. How many minutes do I have, Madam Speaker?
Have 1 minute left.
Okay. And he said that Trinidad and Tobago was a country that was very important in being looked at. And what he meant clearly was that in this time of high international finance crimes, of high terrorism, of criminality that crossed borders, that this was a country that you had to pay attention to. So I concede to the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, that we need to address those issues. There is no issue about that. The question is, how do we do it, and do we do it well? And do we do it as a sovereign state in the best interest of all citizens rather than any other concern? Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Until West.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Let me address very briefly some of the points raised with pretentious passion by the member for Caroni Central. Madam Speaker, he asked the question rather glibly, what have we done to deal with white-collar crime? Well, the records would show that this government, since we came into office, we used the power and the law that is available to the government, that is to say, actions in the civil court seeking redress for apparent, so far, wrongs that have taken place against the Treasury and the people of Trinidad and Tobago. The matters have been and are being investigated, and through the Office of the Attorney General, civil action has been pursued against certain persons so that they will have their day in court to explain the challenges that those actions present. And that's all the government could do. In respect of the criminal side, that is a matter for the police, that is a matter for the DPP, over which we have no control, over whose activity we must take no part, or we cannot be therefore involved in. And therefore, to answer my friend's question, this government has done and will continue to do all that is within its power to treat with white-collar crime as we found it in prevalence when we came to government. But my friend for Caroni is in a state of in-betweenity. He almost challenged for the leadership of the UNC, and he's still a member of the 120-strong COP. We are, Madam Speaker, he said to us that any serious parliamentarian will support these measures, but the records in this House show that his colleagues on the other side, and that's why I tell him speak for himself, his colleagues on the other side have demonstrated consistently in this Parliament that they are not in that sense serious. I just want to tell him they are serious money launderers.
Madam Speaker, 48-6. 48-6.
I said there are.
Overruled. Please continue.
Thank you very much. I said there are serious, he said to us, any serious parliamentarian will support these measures. I told him speak for himself. Because there are in this world serious money launderers, serious bribe takers, and serious thieves. Whether they will support it is quite a different story. The member for Caroni Central must notice today in this very important debate, certain serious members on the other side are, to me at any rate, I don't know if they gave you an explanation, but to me, the member for Laventille West, inexplicably and strangely absent. All of the concerns he has expressed, how serious it is, what the Charge d'Affaires in the U.S. embassies of the U.S. Embassy said yesterday, many of the serious players, starting with Siparia, Oropuch East, Caroni East, are absent today. Chaguanas West, to me, inexplicably and strangely absent. Serious as this is, talk for yourself. The member for Caroni Central told us that there are flaws in the appointments and the system of the magistracy. We know that. They told us as well that there are issues in the senior judiciary. We also know that. But those are matters that are being addressed and will constantly have to be addressed, but they are separate from this. Those matters cannot detain us or cause us to stand still on these equally important issues. Understand that. Understand that. And they will be addressed, and of course they are being addressed. On the point of self-incrimination, the member challenged the amendment to the FIU Act and told us that the amendments that are before us in this regard have the potential, at least one of them, to cause or engender self-incrimination, which is a breach of Section 5 of the Constitution, and he quoted the relevant section in the Constitution. I simply want to draw to the member's attention in the bill that he has just contributed to, a copy of which I hold in my right hand, in the amendment to the FIU Act, we are inserting a new Section 2E, which says, and I quote, "Nothing in this section shall be construed as requiring any person to give any information which may incriminate him." A very simple answer to a very banal question. And therefore, on that point, on that point alone, there's no question of any breach of the constitutional provisions according to the Trinidad and Tobago. None, none, none. Madam Speaker, just deal with that in its totality. Madam Speaker, as has been said by previous speakers, this bill amends the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the Financial Intelligence Unit Act, the Customs Act, and the Exchange Control Acts, as well as the FIU Act regulations and the Exchange Control Import and Export Order of 1993. The common feature with all of these 5, or depending on how you look at it, 7 elements, is that the common feature with them is that they deal with money. Most crimes are about money, wealth accumulation, trying to get a hold of what is not rightly or justifiably yours. Money is the root of all evil, they say. The love of money, same thing. Just by way of a quick example, and I know an investigation is now underway, but in the matter of the recent escape, if you can call it that, of a prisoner, in that matter, I am looking forward to the outcome of the investigation and would not be surprised, Madam Speaker, if it turns out that the lure, the power of money made its presence felt. I would not be surprised.
I wouldn't allow you to go any further on that. Please move on, please, member.
Thank you very much. Whether the crime is blackmail, larceny, robbery, money laundering, kidnapping for ransom, extortion, murder, or human trafficking, usually it's about money. And it is now self-evident to law enforcement that if you follow the money, you are likely to find the crime and most certainly the criminals. It's like, sometimes I say, you just have to look at where the pipers trek every night and you have a good idea, or every day, and you have a good idea where the drug merchants are. Just follow it. In a sense, you can detect a lot of crimes as well if you take the profit out of it. My friends on the other side, much as the member for Caroni Central tells us with great assertion that any serious person would support these measures, I have found, sitting here and participating in these debates, that there are many on that side who have shown abject rejection and resistance to supporting measures to follow the money. That's my experience. And I have to ask myself, and I do ask myself, why? But we will follow the money. And likely, we will find the crimes, and we will find the criminals. The information technology platform in the world today means that crime has become far more cross-border than it could have been in the past, and far more organized. In response to this international reality, approximately 190 countries of the world, including Trinidad and Tobago, have organized themselves to operate on the same principles, follow the money, on the same laws, FIUs, in 152 countries, in order to put up an international response to what is a burgeoning international problem. I read a case years ago where a young man working in a financial institution, a bank in London, took the pence of all the accounts he dealt with. He took the cents. So if the person had £198 and 36 cents, he took that 36 pence. And he did that in many cases and accumulated a substantial amount of money, and each victim would not have even recognized it. But the money was transferred electronically to a bank in Kuwait. And there arose an issue as to where the crime was consummated, whether it was consummated in England where it was removed, or whether where it was kept permanently to deprive the owner thereof. That was a live issue. So today, you have these complications, and the IT platform is used in this regard, and therefore ours is just one of 190 countries of 195. The world recognizes 195 countries, bar the Holy See and the state of Palestine. There are some particular international law issues around those, but the world recognizes 195 separate states or countries, and 190 are engaged in the same actions and the same kinds of laws and principles of which we now speak. This is the international standard dealing, and these countries judge themselves. You heard the Attorney General and the member for Port of Spain, North St. Anne's West tell us about these evaluations and the reports that come from them. These countries have a mechanism to look at each other to see whether each other is keeping their end of the bargain to protect all of us from international and organized cross-border crimes. Human trafficking, money laundering and the like. You will recall the airport scandal, which is still in front of us. It was the United States' international money laundering apparatus that detected that money was being laundered from Piaco out of Trinidad and Tobago. Wasn't any local organization determined that, you know. It was the United States' apparatus, and they informed the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And a PNM government did what was required after that. And today we have a situation where persons are before the court for 17 years. But that's a separate issue. Showing that when you have big money and deep pockets, you could throw plenty money at the court, overwhelm it, and you could try to protect yourself that way. So countries are judged, by the way, in this pool of 192 states, they are judged by the way that they manage this business of money laundering and terrorism. And talking about terrorism, it is real, as the member for Caroni East, Caroni Central told us. Anything that happens anywhere in the world, you could expect it anywhere, including in Trinidad and Tobago. I saw, last week I traveled, week before, and I saw the Israelis and how they have to deal with terrorism in their country in a very hostile neighborhood. I'm not getting involved in their politics, but they are surrounded by Egypt and Jordan and Lebanon and Syria, raw hostility, and they have to deal with terrorism on a daily and an hourly basis. And there are certain techniques in order to deal with that. And these measures here, because there are people who finance terrorism, so all of these measures here are designed to assist us. There were reports in 1990 that some foreign country was sending arms and sending money and sending medicines to a certain organization here to attack the state. And therefore, these measures are important, nothing to play about. And the AG told us about the third and fourth round evaluations, and he explained the entire process. The member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, and I don't have to repeat it, told us about the group that we are in, the ICRG, the International Cooperation Review Group, and why we want to get ourselves out of these. He told us, and the country must take note, these are not simple issues. If you do not meet these standards, very severe consequences could be brought by this international group upon your country, making you a pariah state, taking you out of the international banking system, and the same troubles that we anticipated if we did not pass the FATCA law can afflict us if we don't come to terms with these improvements. And it is for that reason, among others, that we are here today asking our friends on the other side to be patriotic and to do their parliamentary duty in a very stoic and patriotic way. Support this, and you would be supporting Trinidad and Tobago, not the PNM. And that's why we are here today. Following on the June 2016 mutual evaluation report, certain recommendations were made. The principles of which I spoke, there are 40 recommendations of the FATF and the subset that we are part of called Caribbean or CFATF. And some of the recommendations are what we have brought here today in order that we could keep step with the platform that has been set by the 192 countries. If we don't do that, we have a problem. Just for the benefit of the listeners, the term mutual legal assistance refers to formal cooperation between sovereign states in criminal investigations and proceedings. Mutual legal assistance includes the provision of information and evidence to other jurisdictions and making witnesses available to foreign trial courts. Many mutual legal assistance treaties also include the provision of service of legal documents and for freezing and recovery of assets. Beautiful. Why are some people going to be afraid of this? Why? For example, if a citizen of Trinidad and Tobago, a banker, an accountant, a former minister of government, obtains money improperly in Trinidad and Tobago and seeks to hide it elsewhere, we will need help from that country in order to deal with that citizen, that former minister, that accountant, that banker here. And this makes this business of mutual assistance particularly important. Particularly important. I heard the member for Caroni Central speak of the Central Authority. The role of the Central Authority upon receipt of a request for information typically includes determining whether the request meets the requirements of its domestic law and deciding whether it will, in its jurisdiction, execute the request. And yes, there is a director in place doing a wonderful job for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, member for Caroni Central. Madam Speaker, I would have thought that given the thorough explanation as offered by the member for San Fernando West and the thorough explanation given by the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West, I would have thought that it would have put to bed in the mind and in the intellect of a learned man like the member for Caroni Central all of the issues around the removal of section 22(2)K of this act. But it appears as though it has not. So I am now forced to waste my time to go over again why we are removing section 22(2)K of the act. Simply put, Madam Speaker, it is a recommendation to start with. It is a recommendation from the evaluation, the mutual evaluation report. That is to start with. It is a recommendation. Secondly, Madam Speaker, just get this for you. In 2013, the government of the United National Congress, so-called PP government, they signed on to an agreement which promised that they would do precisely this in 2013. How then do they have difficulty with it today? We are meeting our international obligation which we signed on to, and in 2013, they signed on and agreed that this measure will be brought in the Berlin Declaration, named after the place where the declaration was settled. So to answer my friends on the other side, this was something you promised internationally and it fell to us. Since 2013, they left office 3 months after the 5-year term expired. In 2015, after a sound PNM licking, and they never touched it. They never kept their promise to the international community. It falls to us. And then hypocritically and deceitfully, they come here now to ask us, why are we doing that? And what are we doing? We simply, in the existing arrangement, in section 22(2)K, we said in the law, the mutual assistance in criminal matters law, that when the request for information had to do with tax issues that might affect the person who is the subject of the investigation in their criminal law, we had a discretion to refuse it. Because we have now learned even from FATCA, because FATCA was the United States saying they want access to tax information in Trinidad and Tobago, which is being hidden by any of the citizens or any business in the United States in Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, it is a treaty, so it is supposed to be reciprocal. We understood from that tax is a very important ingredient in the government's armory, so to speak, especially Uncle Sam. If there's one country in the world we know don't play with taxes, it's Uncle Sam. Their IRS takes the business of taxation particularly seriously, and Trinidad and Tobago today should be doing that. That's why we are proposing a revenue authority, akin to the IRS, to make tax collection more efficient, because the government needs the tax, especially in today's circumstances where revenue from our export products have gone almost flat. So tax is an important business. And understanding that, we are now saying that we will provide that support to our international partners, and they will provide that support to us. So section 22(2)K, when removed, will remove that discretion and allow for the sharing of tax information to a foreign partner as they will accord to us. So, Madam Speaker, we had to take them kicking and screaming to sign FATCA, and they did it under public gaze. They became ashamed and afraid of the public, who was seeing clearly that what we were trying to achieve in FATCA was for the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago, to save us from international scorn and reproach. And they too had signed on to FATCA. They were the ones who entered into the IRA. They were the ones. And eventually and reluctantly, they agreed, and we passed the legislation in this House. So it is nothing different, and we call on them to support us today. As it now stands, section 22(2)K is inconsistent with the very FATCA that we passed here. Very much inconsistent with it. And therefore, its removal is to make it consistent with other laws that they passed in this House, to make it consistent with our expectations and obligations internationally, and altogether, there is where we're going. We are following the money, and I know some people are afraid of FATCA, some people are afraid of FATF, some people are afraid of PWC, some people are afraid of the law, some people are afraid of police. Some people are afraid of the member for Port of Spain North, St. Anne's West. Some people are afraid of the member for San Fernando West. And some people afraid that like how cat afraid water. They afraid it like how Satan afraid holy water. And they could do what they want. We will continue to do what we have to do. Because by following the money for the past 2 years, we have unearthed certain cartel activities, certain bid rigging, certain bribery, and identified in a particular case a particular bribe, tax evasion, money laundering, et al. So we know we are on the right track. And we are not afraid because according to a former U.S. ambassador, we don't have no cow in the sun. That was his way of saying cocoa. So we proceed. Clause 3 of this bill, and I move on from section 22. They have now heard it in the greatest detail from 3 speakers on this side, and as a result, I rest that. Clause 3 seeks to amend section 44 of the Proceeds of Crime Act. The Attorney General described it in his contribution as dynamite. And it really is serious, because it now makes money laundering, which was an indictable offense, one that is triable either way, meaning that it could be tried in the High Court as well as in the Magistrates Court. And we heard some comments from my friend about the Magistrates Court, and I've already told the member for Caroni Central, as I tell all of them, yes, there are issues in all aspects of the governance and the management. Trinidad and Tobago, I will be the first to admit, is a troubled place, made far more troubled by the advent of those people being in government for 5 years. They did untold damage to every single institution in this country. Everything. Everything. And therefore, that is the way we are treating with it. So one can have the option. The DPP has some decision to make whether it's going to be done before a judge and jury, whether it is going to be done in the magistrate's court. As it now stands, if you leave it as an indictable offense simpliciter, what you will find is exactly what you find in such cases where it is prolonged in the magistrate's court, and there are people with deep pockets who know how to play the thing, as we have seen. Now, the member for Caroni East, he spoke earlier in this debate. And he, yes, no, I must. He confused like crazy the difference between mutual assistance and extradition. But again, in the Mutual Assistance in Criminal Matters Act, Chapter 1124, in Section 6, it says expressly, and I quote, "Nothing in this act authorizes the extradition or arrest or detention of any person for the purpose of extradition." I forgive the member for Caroni East, because in the first place, he's not an attorney at law. Secondly, they sent him in just to pad up a little bit and to detain us from the very useful approach that we are taking here. But extradition is quite a separate matter. He raised all manners of extradition. We're not dealing with that here. We're dealing with mutual assistance, which is a different thing. And he cited the case in which Mr. Justice Budu Singh pronounced on this matter. That was an entirely different thing, where some of the Piarco Airport persons were before the court dealing with whether the matter should be heard in Trinidad or heard in the United States, a separate issue. And the court, applying the so-called Cotroni principles, decided that they would be better heard in Trinidad and Tobago, the matters, and the court pronounced accordingly. That has nothing to do with mutual assistance in criminal matters. So it is a pity that the member for Caroni East is here, but one of them can communicate with him and let him know that that is not an issue. That is not an issue. So, Madam Speaker, in terms of the attempts of the government, not only are we complying with our international obligation here, but what we are doing is trying to open up the criminal justice system. It is in that context that we approach this Parliament to abolish preliminary inquiries, because we understand how that archaic method could obstruct the system. We understand how delays affect us. So we are proposing that, and we seek the support. We propose as well trial by judge alone. We propose to section off or to open a division of the court dealing with family law and children's cases so that they'll be managed in a certain way, and very shortly the same with criminal cases. I'm only mentioning those things a passa to let the Parliament and my friends on the other side in particular understand that action is being taken to improve the criminal justice system. And I say so in answer to my friend, the member for Caroni Central. Not to forget that the whole ticketing regime, most of which found themselves inside of the magistrate's court, will be now treated with administratively, so as to free up 120,000 cases from that structure, to make it cleaner, to make it lighter, so it could work a little more swiftly to the benefit of all Trinidad and Tobago. And that's the reason why.
Honourable Member, your original 30 minutes are now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes if you wish to avail yourself of it. Please continue.
Most certainly, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much. In the case of the summary matters, if they are heard summarily, the fine is 25 million, because we're not talking small money here. We have seen in the cabinet of Trinidad and Tobago deals, programs, construction programs, development, loans in the tune of $1 billion. Once, twice, 3 times. We have seen is millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. We saw recently, and I don't want to deal with the matter, you may tell me, my friend on the other side, it is sub judice, but we saw where a piece of land that was valued by the state for $52 million was sold for $125 million.
Member,
yes.
I'm not going to let you go any further, please.
And therefore, the fine of $25 million should not startle us. Those whose hands were in the cookie jars will know that $25 million might be a jiggle in a pickle. But for the average citizen, including me, that is real money. And therefore, the fine is $25 million and the sentence is 15 years. Personally, it should be 50 for me, but I will support the Attorney General's proposal for 15 years. And if the matter is dealt with and you are convicted indictably, the fine is $50 million. For some, a jiggle in a pickle. But 30 years. It will be open to the court to sentence to 30 years imprisonment. Clause 4 seeks to amend Section 2 of the FIU Act as well, where in that section, we recognize the so-called Egmont Group. We joined in 2013 at the same time I spoke to you about, Madam Speaker, when I told you they signed on and promised to do certain things. There are 152 countries with FIUs doing the same things that we do, sharing and exchanging information. And we are saying here, traditionally, the sharing came upon request. So the principle is sharing. But we now say in the current law that we share if the information is requested. Common sense alone tells us. The evaluation report tells us. The agreement, the Berlin Agreement tells us that we should not only share when it is requested, but we can act on, not we, every FIU of the 152 could act on its own volition and share information because the principle remains whole, that of sharing. What problems, my friends, could have with that? The principle is the same. The concept is the same. The only thing is, on its own volition, an FIU can share information. And I hark back to the airport scandal. The United States identified something. They told us, at least the Prime Minister at the time told us, when they saw the large amounts of money moving, they thought first it was about drug dealing. Upon their inquiry, they realized it hadn't to do with drugs, but it had to do with laundering out of the airport in Trinidad and Tobago, out of the airport contract. That began at 400, it was approved at $400 million, and it went to $1.6 billion. It quadrupled. That is 1,000 million plus another 600 million. I'm sorry. 1.6 billion. And therefore, this business of sharing information on your own volition, we, Trinidad and Tobago, was a beneficiary of that. Quite apart from the principle as I expressed. And therefore, we have no problem with that, and I support the measure. Section 12 is amended to make it a summary offense where the financial institution fails to comply with a court order. Previously, it was an indictable offense. Makes it easier now and we can proceed. Clause 5 of this bill amends the Customs Act, and as we all know, customs is critical to the economy. Over $4 billion in revenue was brought in a year, last year, by the Customs Division, and therefore it's very important. especially in this time of economic hardship. And anything that could be done to make their collection of taxes and their work easier and more efficient is to the benefit of Trinidad and Tobago. And if we say that you are obliged if you make some declaration and there has been some amendment to it, usually you have to keep it for 3 months. And if we say now that you should keep it for 6 years, which is consistent with existing law in the Income Tax Act, nothing is bad or strange about that. You just keep the records. That's all the importer is expected to do. Just keep the records. In the event that they have to call on you for it, you produce it, and you keep it for 6 years. You do the same with your income tax records in any event. No issue there at all. But my friend for Caroni Central, on behalf of the opposition, made very heavy weather of that. And then you are required to produce it when it is requested during that 6 years in 30 days. That's all. The member for Caroni Central, as I close, Caroni East, he asked again very glibly, why are we, after 2 years in office, he asked deceptively, why are we still a money laundering country? Imagine we have to answer that from my friends on the other side. Why after 2 years we are still a money laundering country? I told him, as I tell him now, I'll tell my friends on the other side. We have been working assiduously in the last 2 years. The very measures in front of us today is testimony to the fact that we are attempting to deal with it. The very measures before us. And in any case, the member for Caroni East was basing that question and the evidence he gave as he raised it on the issue of drug interdiction. He quoted a report that dealt with drugs and not necessarily the business of sharing this kind of information. Madam Speaker, I recognize that my time has run. And therefore, I ask my friends on the other side, these are very, very simple amendments to existing legislation. Very simple amendments. There's no question of any breach of the Constitution, and therefore a simple majority is all that is here required. We've made it clear in express terms in a new Section 2E that self-incrimination is not an issue. We've explained ad nauseam why we are removing the discretion in Section 22(2)K. We have dealt with those issues. All I could do on behalf of Trinidad and Tobago, the people who need our protection from this Parliament, is that my friends on the other side will put their personal concerns, put their personal pique aside, their fears for anything, because we are not as fearsome as they might think. We are just following the law and following the money. I urge my friends, therefore, on the other side to support these measures, and I thank you very warmly, Madam Speaker, for this intervention.
Member for St. Augustine.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Many years ago, I went on a boys' line to Cancun. It was an extremely happy event. But what I remember most of all from that event was that one of the numbers, not excluding myself, I will say, who could not swim, went into one of the most magnificent and beautiful pools you would ever have seen. And there, after several minutes of much commotion, flapping, and water movement, he emerged to look up to see that he had not moved 1 inch. This flapping is reminiscent of what we have here.
Only contribution.
Much motion without movement.
Well said.
As my friend, and I mean that in a truism from Laventil West, has indicated that the country is afraid, and many are afraid, of course, of the change of laws. They're afraid of bandits. They're afraid of murder. They're afraid of high food prices. They're afraid of recession. They're afraid of being laid off. They're afraid of property tax. They're afraid of so many things, and they're also afraid that the campaign never ends. Without doubt, what has been happening with the very, very skillful use of language is to suggest that all that has gone wrong with this country could be put on the shoulders of a prior government and of members of the parliament who sit here. As much as that rhetoric will strike a chord for those who are not careful, I ask myself, when will the truth ever be told? When will it truly be told? Because I am hearing, Mr. Prime Minister, that I hope that I got it wrong from the news, because there's so much fake news about, that the cabinet of my country, under the Prime Minister's direction, put together a committee manned by ministers to assist in the procurement, is it?
Yes, yes. A subcommittee.
Of ferry for service our beloved brothers and sisters in Tobago? When have we arrived at a position where politicians have the authority to determine procurement? And as an aside, maybe they have it right now in getting as one of the legal officers in the office of the Prime Minister, Nafisa Mohammed, a person who have great admiration and respect.
Just want to know if you could tie what you're saying to the bill, please.
I'm most grateful because the tie is clear. The rope is as strong as you could get. We're dealing here with corruption.
Six.
Remember, again, I don't see the relevance. What we're dealing with is certain provisions. I would ask you to deal with those provisions. As far as 48.6, I don't make any ruling on that, but I don't believe we're dealing with corruption. We're dealing with certain pieces of legislation. Please.
There I go, falling victim to the words from a friend from Port of Spain North. When he spoke, he opened and said that this is about corruption. Yes. I am getting fooled repeatedly like other citizens in this country. This is what they said. The substance of this legislation.
Remember, I've already ruled. Please.
I can't read that. Thank you. So when we deal now with the issues of procurement, I ask, we bring all of this flattering legislation, and not flattering in the sense of commendation, but flattering like a fowl with its head cut off. Where is the implementation of procurement legislation? If it is, the allegation is to be made that the last government was all about corruption, and that is the image that they want to create, the propaganda that has been spread and seeped into the psyche of the nation. It was that government who put legislation on the books for procurement legislation. Why are we not, after 2+ years, hearing about the implementation of this thing? That is what the population wants to hear about. They don't want to hear about mutual assistance. They want to hear about local assistance in dealing with corruption on the ground before we get money to go elsewhere. Let us prevent it from even going anywhere. And that, to me, is where we should be focusing upon. Now, I want to make it quite clear. There are many on the other side who genuinely wish to see a better Trinidad and Tobago, who genuinely believe that legislative change is necessary, as we all believe. And to have heard my learned friend from Laventil West go through the most pedantic and self-evident statements really does not help us one iota. Because what we need to do is to look and see if this legislation will really do the things that they expect it to. The proclamations with the greatest expectations, whether they will achieve these things, or whether they are just there to give a flash in the pan that something is happening, and after the flash is gone, not a song, not a murmur, not a movement. We've had a lot of legislative change already. We have a lot of laws on the books of Trinidad and Tobago that are not being implemented. To put it in a context, I have never seen a law book lock up anybody. I have never seen a law book prosecute anything. Laws are necessary. If we do not have the foundational laws that we already have at our disposal and we use it to benefit, are we creating a fiction to believe that the more law there is, that we are a more lawful country? apparently, when there's more law passed and put on our books, there is less adherence to those laws. What about the implementation and effectiveness of these laws? Is the DPP office, and I know some effort has been made to give its manpower the necessary numbers that they require, and I compliment that. But I think we need to do far more for them. And the member for Caroni Central hit on a most important foundational note when he spoke about the judiciary, because all of these laws, at the end of the day and the beginning of a prosecution, comes before our courts. And if the people of Trinidad and Tobago are not satisfied and have confidence in that institution, then a lot of the things that will happen will be seen as mischievous, and many have been in the past, and it will not carry the sort of confidence that is required to restore a nation of values, a nation of order, and a nation that is law-abiding, and seriously so, and not just for the sake of saying that we are. I'll give you an example. Yesterday, I think it was in the news, there was an appointment of 3 High Court judges. How many in this room, and we are the, what shall I say, in the hierarchy of the nation, close, we're at the top of it, and in the wider community, how many have even an iota who these persons are, who we bestow power upon, that will determine the sake of our lives, of our, sometimes the future of our lives, in a real sense, or at least in a commercial sense, and certainly they have the power to determine our rights. We need Attorney General, my friend. Of course.
Just for the record and out of regard, thank you first of all for giving me. I just want to put on record that Magistrate Gibson, now Justice Gibson, and Magistrate Ramsumer Hines, I've had the pleasure of practicing before both of them for many, many years in the judiciary, both as they sat as, in the case of Madam Justice Gibson, a temporary judge and then a magistrate, and also in respect of the Honourable Magistrate Hines. So I just want to put onto the record that they're well known to those of us that have practiced in court.
Yes, so we have one.
What?
The Attorney General knows. How many others do? No, I won't. Maybe 2, maybe 3. The point being, Mr. Speaker, is that we need a new system to assess
Mr. Deputy Speaker, 48-1, please. This is not about the judiciary.
Overruled, overruled. But member, again, tie in your point and get back on track. Right.
I could understand the anxieties of my little friends. But we are in a position in this nation where we need to reinvent ourselves, sometimes some foundation which we have moved away from.
Caroni Central, please. Proceed, member for St. Augustine.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So all of these laws that we pass, unless these seeds upon which or from which we hope great fruit to bear from the plants which are being planted, is planted in fertile soil in a judiciary we can trust, then all we will bear in the future is disappointment and some level of loss of further respect. And that is the point the member for Caroni Central was making. And I could hardly agree with him more. Mr. Speaker, we move forward. We now have this new section, or the new amendment that allows money laundering to be determined by a magistrate. With all due respect, and there are some fantastic, brilliant minds who sit in the magistracy, money laundering, by its very nature, would be extremely complex matters, and the very thing that my friends wish to avoid, which is to burden the courts, because if they have any idea about the number of cases before any single magistrate on a single day, just going through the list is such a burden. So they put that burden, and I can't imagine that they put in the same capacity matters to be heard that involve financial machinations, that may involve international gameplay, as we've been hearing repeatedly from every speaker, to be determined in a magistrate's court when those magistrates are so already overburdened. how many cases, and my friend the Attorney General is always very, very quick to reference statistics to tell us how many of these requires how many of those. Have we heard a statistic even of the speculation with all of the material available to the FIU as it is now as to how many prosecutable or cases that could be possibly put before a court? How many there are? And why the need then? Are we in the tens, the dozens, the hundreds, the thousands to say that it then requires the attention of a magistrate? And you know, in a devaluing currency environment, 25 million TT is a whole lot of money. $25 million is the fine, the maximum fine that a magistrate is now given the power to implement. Do you know the suspicions in the magistrate's court that they will create? Whether it's a trial that you have a choice in to say yes, and I agree. And I make no bones about it. I am a criminal defense attorney, and I do all sorts of cases, and for disclosure purposes, including cases against customs. $25 million. I ask myself, as a lawyer, why would I suggest to a client to put that decision in the hand of a single person, and tying back now into the first part, who has not been tested in terms of the public having an assessment of who this person is, how they qualify to be a magistrate apart from 7 years service? Why would I do this? To put that in the hand of a single person? And you know what? We've heard it many times before. Certain persons wish to have cases done before certain courts. I make no allegation.
Member, again, keep focus on the bill at hand. It's not about the magistracy or the judiciary, right? You're making the point, but I need you to tie it back in quickly and come back to the bill at hand.
The point being that when there's so much money, what you will do is to create more suspicion that they chose to do a case before a magistrate's court rather than a jury trial, because something is amiss. The very mischief that all my friends on the other side spoke about, the love of money, the seductive element of the thing, can cause men and women to do things they never imagined they would. And that is the point I'm making, further undermining the confidence in the judiciary that we ought to have. And that is the point. So it is most relevant, because the foundation upon which all of these laws are placed would be ultimately the determination of a court, whether in the High Court or in the Magistrates' Court. Mr. Speaker, it is very interesting when one looks at the compendium of legislative change that is before us today. And I too have to add my voice to the concern that the FIU's ability to collect information as required for tactical and strategic analysis in order to generate trends and typologies, and to disseminate financial intelligence information to local and foreign authorities on their own motion or upon request. This could be a capricious exercise that rightly or wrongly, because they may have good motive behind it, but we are not here only about the motive of those who we give power, but the legitimacy of the exercise of that power. What this is saying here is that the FIU could do things without being prodded by a need to go into the private and personal and confidential affairs of every single citizen. Not about minister or foreign ministers, we're talking about every citizen in the nation. This is an overreach of power that, with all due respect, is not required here. Because there's no trigger. There's no trigger that says there's a reasonable cause to do so. When you look at the wide scope of the language, it is almost like, you know, okay, I feel to do this. Let me check on member for Tobago West. Let me check on whomever. And then put it under the category for the purpose of, and I will read it again, to collect information as required for tactical and strategic analysis in order to analyze trends and typology, to generate trends and typologies. This is enormous power. And whether they have power already, the issue now is why are we adding to it when we've not seen any benefit to our country from the FIU's work? This, what shall I say, cascade of cases for money laundering, when is it going to come? Why is it going to come? The FIU doesn't have already sufficient, and we hear reports of so many suspicious transactions being transmitted for investigation, and nothing comes of it? Why are we doing this? You see, if something shows merit, then you give it the kind of gas or the lubrication to continue its work. But I say there will come time when we must speak to this more. But at this point in time, I'm saying it is not necessary, because my friends have shown no logical or explained reason for the exercise of this further power. Now, much ado about a lot. The issue of the Section 18G. And this deals, Mr. Speaker, with the right, or sorry, no, the power we now wish to give to ensure that information is given, but yet there's a catch-all phrase that says that it does not affect the right against self-incrimination. Mr. Speaker, this is a very dangerous venture into settled rights. And it reads this at 18G, 2A. In order to secure compliance with the written laws listed under 18F, the FIU may require any person to provide to it any documents, information, or explanation on any information. Now, tie that back with the section I just referenced. They may have no good cause or reason to require this, other than to get material to create typologies and trends. But here is the power for them now, acting like a statistical office. 2B, a warrant under subsection 2 may include the requirement to provide a police officer with any information or any explanation on any information in accordance with subsection 1B. 2C, without prejudice to any other written law, a person who willfully obstructs a police officer in the exercise of his powers or the performance of his duties under this section. B, willfully fails to comply with any requirement properly made to him by any such police officer. Or C, without reasonable cause, excuse, fails to give such police officer any other assistance which he may reasonably require to be given for the purpose of exercising his powers or performing his duties under this section, commits an offense and is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $10,000 and to imprisonment. Hear this, imprisonment for 12 months. The learned friend, my fellow attorneys on the other side must know. And the member for Laventille West, more so than most, he being an extremely well-experienced in the bitter duties of a police officer, and what really is obstructing a police officer in the execution of their duty. I'll give you one wild example. You know, in the old days, before the partnership introduced speed guns, that has been usurped in all of its glory by my friends, and I'm grateful that they're proceeding with our ideas. That when they used to use the old-time police, so they drop in a little flag and so. And I think even till today, when they have the speed guns, drivers along the other side flashing lights. Do you know that they are guilty of obstructing the police in the lawful function of their duty? It's as simple as that, and it is as wide as you could get. But here we have the FIU requiring some information for typologies and looking at trends. Now we want to give them this incursion to say, I'm going to send police to get the information for me to do my little thing. And if you don't, no. Yes, of course.
Could the member please indicate if Section 4
C of the Constitution is being breached?
I'm coming to that. I'm coming to that. One of the most brilliant men in the country. So Mr. Speaker, a person, and I read on into the section, Mr. Education Minister, please listen to this, you might learn something here. Right? 2D. A person who, when required, and this gentlemen and ladies of our country, hear this one. A person who, when required to give information to a police officer in the exercise of his duties or the performance of his duties under this section, knowingly gives false or misleading information to any such police officer is liable on summary conviction to a fine of $10,000 and to imprisonment for 12 months. Knowingly, that word is extraordinarily difficult for you to disprove. Because there may be circumstances where, as far as you are aware, you give certain information because you're afraid of the police, and rightly so, we've seen reasons for that. And you give information, and it turns out to be false, and they drop the charge on you. And because of the circumstances, it appears on the other side that you must have known. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you did. The onus is on you. Now, the catch-all gives me no comfort to say that nothing in this section at 2A shall be construed as requiring any person to give any information which may incriminate him. The minister... Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The member for Caroni Central, in his usual highly intellectual and sometimes above the head of many analysis of this thing. Yeah.
Would the member for St. Augustine give way?
Of course.
Right. I just wanted to ask if you have been able to answer the question. I didn't get the answers yet. The question that Barataria Sama asked.
I am coming to that. You can't wait. Well, you know that anyhow. Let me not go there.
Members, we still have to maintain a certain decorum amidst all the discussion that's taking place. And I think that I'm on my legs at this time. It's now 4:29:26. I think it will be a good time for us to suspend for tea. And member, you will continue your discourse on resumption. At 5.